with a falsehood, you're faced with two options. You can accept it or you can reject it. The basis upon which we take one of these actions is a product of our critical thinking capabilities and a desire to know what is true instead of confirming our bias. A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. On Brainstorm, we choose the hard truths over the comforting lies. Reason, compassion, skepticism. This is the Brainstorm Podcast.
All right. Hi, and welcome to the Brainstorm Podcast Skeptic Studio, the interview portion of the Brainstorm Podcast. I'm Cory, and my panel tonight are Angela.
Hello.
Destin.
Hello.
Lisa.
I'm eating too many Skittles.
And the always amazing Dave doing sound.
Amazing for one last time this
season, yeah.
He's the great and mighty Oz because there's a curtain.
Right.
You can't look at me.
We are here in Roman Empire Studios in Regina, Saskatchewan, and today is June 22nd, 2018. Our guest tonight is Matthew Lee Loftus, a.k.a. the Credible Hulk. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
Took us a bit to get going, but we figured it out.
I figure it out. You mean we found an alternate method?
Yeah, that's right.
Hashtag Skype sucks.
Hashtag Skype sucks. Yeah. So I guess a good place to start is kind of your background. How did you get into skepticism?
Basically, I mean, I went through this phase after I graduated from music college where I was just kind of absorbing a lot of information. I was out of school briefly for the first time pretty much ever, and was just listening to a lot of audio lectures, reading a lot of stuff, different topics, and I'm not really sure exactly how it came about, but I sort of started stumbling across things like Skeptoid, the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, and stuff like that. And so at first it was just kind of like this whole landscape of different philosophical outlooks on determining the nature of reality, you know, and I just came to realize that was probably the most effective way to go, was to focus on the scientific method, you know, mixing the best of the epistemological frameworks that humans have ever devised, and empiricism along with both deductive and inductive reasoning, and formulating this more systematic approach to understanding the universe.
That sounds so. You seem to be pretty knowledgeable in some of the debates that you get into. Is that self-taught, or is that stuff that you studied in school?
It's a combination. I have like 7 associate's degrees and a bachelor's, you know, but no master's. And actually, I'm hoping to do a master's program in biophysics at my local university, but turns out that I can't do that with just an associate's in physics, no matter how many other ones I have. So I have to finish the bachelor's, and I figured I might as well finish the biology bachelor's while I was at it, since I was actually closer to that than I was the physics one. And if I was going to do that, might as well do double major, double minor. So because I'm already done with the chemistry minor, a lot of this came about from me just studying stuff for the hell of it, you know, to some extent to just make me better at the skeptical blogging. And sometimes it just I get carried away with it, and all of a sudden I end up with a chemistry associate's degree and a biology associate's degree and a mathematics associate's degree, which was like literally by accident. And then I would start taking some 400 level biochemistry classes. Hey, this is pretty cool. What about physical chemistry? Oh, this is cool too. Oh, modern physics. You know, hey, now I satisfy the prerequisites for the upper division undergraduate quantum theory classes. So I'll register for that, you know, and just keeps on going, you know, and even during the breaks, you know, I'm just always studying something. I'm always learning new math, a new science, or something. It's just become a huge part of my life, and it's like a lifestyle, along with going to the gym and playing music. You know, it's just like been interwoven into the entire framework of my existence. And I try to bring pieces of that into my skeptical outreach and science communication.
I have a question. What's an associate's degree?
Well, it's basically like a 2 to 2.5 year degree.
I don't
It's
think
like
we
if
have
you
that
don't count
here.
like all. It's like basically half of a bachelor's. If you finish an associate's in something, you're roughly halfway. You've gotten all your general ed stuff that's not exclusive to your major out of the way, and you've done like maybe the first 2 or maybe 2.5 years worth of core courses that are specific to your major. And so I've done that in like, a whole bunch of different areas. And some of them were like literally, like I said, literally by accident. Like they would call me up and ask me if I was going to walk in some graduation ceremony. I said, what are you talking about? That sort of situation. But then, I started taking courses at university in New Mexico, and I look at the schedule, and I feel like a kid in a candy store. I mean, there's all this stuff you can't get at the 2-year college, that's really freaking cool. So, for the fall, I'm registered for a course on mathematical methods for physics and a course on quantum mechanics. Had a lot of quantum in my course I took in the spring. But that was sort of preparing for this one, which is actually first of a 2-semester series. And I figured, well, I might as well, if I'm going to go this path, I might as well get my upper division classical mechanics stuff out of the way, so register for the first of a 2-semester series in that. And threw in a microbiology in there for good measure, because then I could maybe, that's a prerequisite for doing CRISPR. They just had a course added just a year or two ago on using CRISPR gene editing stuff, and I thought that would be pretty fun. And so this would satisfy a prerequisite to that. And I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Don't know if this is the wisest life choice I've ever made, but I'm learning.
It sounds interesting, yet stressful and expensive.
Yes to all three.
So how long have you been running your Facebook page?
I started Credible Hulk in January of 2015. It was at the 10th to be exact.
Wow.
10th of January. And before that, I was running the page called Stop the Anti-Science Movement.
Okay.
And for a while, I was the only person posting on there because the founder had kind of just gotten burnt on the whole scene and only just wanted to do comedy. So I was the only one running it. And then eventually, when it got to be too hard for me to come up with enough content for both pages without having a significant overlap where I was just copying the content from one page to the other.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Delegated. I ended up delegating a young physicist to do that work, and he's been kind of taking a break from it because he just finished like 2 bachelor's degrees. He's like kind of burnt on doing that for the time being, so I've been trying to cover for him when I can. But I consider it to be his page. I'm just like the backup admin. But Credible Hulk is my main one.
Yeah, so we've actually been running the podcast for longer than the Credible Hulk has existed.
That's a fun fact for you.
Doesn't say great things for our reach.
No, it just means we suck, but we know that. We're okay with it.
Yeah.
No, we're very niche.
We're very niche. That's
Very
right.
niche.
And he's like obviously better at like naming things. That's an awesome name, right?
Well,
Like,
That's a super awesome name.
no offense, brainstorm's awesome, but no, really, come on.
Well, I'd like to be able to say that I came up with it, but people were calling me that as long ago as 2012. There was somebody made a viral meme about that, and then I kept on getting friends and acquaintances posting it on my wall. So I'd seen it like all these times. It's like, oh, that's pretty cool. I've seen it before, and then they would just keep doing it. They just keep on to say, like, this is you. And it wasn't until, what actually ended up turning the tide and convincing me to do it was I hung out on New Year's Eve of 2015, the end of 2014, beginning of 2015, with Yvette de Hentremont, Cy Babe, down in Southern California. And she kept on trying to cajole me into doing a page called The Credible Hulk. She had already been calling me that. A bunch of people have been calling me that. And I was reluctant to do it because I'm just like filled with self-doubt. It's like, oh, what if I'm not Hulkish enough? What if I'm not credible enough? What if this? What if that?
Yeah. And
I don't know. She kept on shooting down all my arguments, and I'm saying, well, I'm a skeptic. I have to concede, when I'm beaten, and I have to do what the evidence seems to suggest is the intelligent thing to do. So
yeah. Well, so Cy Babe is to thank for your credible Hulkness.
She's the one that finally talked me into it, and because she was persistent. She kept on bringing it up. A week later, she was on the internet when we were in different states, and she was still telling me, "You've got to do this."
Wow,
right?
And here you are, a pillar of the skeptical community.
Pillar is a strong word.
So what's it like being a rational human being
A
in a
muscly
country
green
full of
pillar.
just crazy, right-wing, nut-bar-y, crazy?
It's like you're watching a movie, except that it's real, and you're just blown away that it's not a movie.
Right.
It's really, I'm serious. It's really surreal. Where, this kind of post-truth trend has really taken hold, and everything that somebody doesn't like is fake news, and it's just What can you even say? I mean, it's just
the shittiest continuous shot
agape
movie
with your jaw on the floor.
Yeah,
going WTF?
Yeah, it's pretty bizarre.
We're gonna make you an honorary Canadian because you apologized before, and you didn't really even do anything. So
for the technical issues.
So you're in. That pretty much gets you a Canadian passport.
Regina.
Yeah.
Did you see?
I played a show there once.
Oh, nice.
I was subbing for a tour with the technical death metal band Cephalic Carnage, and we played a show there.
I feel like you're totally bullshitting us right now.
Do you remember where you played?
That's like for reals?
What was that?
Do you remember where you played?
I remember what it looked like. I just don't remember the name of the.
Was it really sketchy with black walls?
Was it the State?
It was probably the Exchange.
Like this separate whole room that they weren't using, and me and the basis of Exhumed, this other band.
I know Exhumed.
Yeah, Exhumed is awesome.
We set up these chairs so we could do our dips and our incline push-ups or decline push-ups and stuff like that because we didn't have any weights. So that's how we would stay in shape during the tour. Was we would just find different body weight exercises to do if we could find somewhere to do pull-ups. So I remember it was a separate room. It was like there was a bar there, but nobody was using it. It was partitioned off from the part where the bands were playing.
That kind of sounds like the Exchange.
Or the State.
The State? Well, yeah, I guess.
No, the separate bar is the club. Yeah, there's the club, and then there's the Exchange side.
I could find out, but I would have to look it up because I think I have a link somewhere.
I'm curious to know where that would have been.
Had all the venue names.
Well, and you probably would have dealt with Xandra because she's like the only person who booked metal shows in the city. So I bet. Well,
I was just a substitute drummer, so I didn't really deal with any promoters or anybody.
Yeah, we used to have a really good metal scene here.
Then everyone realized that metal sucks.
No.
What? I had to say it. I used to
date a guy that did like an acoustic set in between a metal show. He was like the intermission between the metal show.
That's neat.
It was just him and his guitar. These dudes are like frog jumping over people, and then he's singing with his guitar. It's quite a contradiction.
I see a scary lack of guns.
Where? Like right behind him.
Yeah,
Doesn't
like
have any
shouldn't you have like grenades and isn't that expected?
camo shirt.
Like piles of ammo.
No,
I don't even see an American flag.
So-
What's going on?
I'm gonna plead the fifth on that one.
So back to skepticism a little bit. What do you find is the subject you spend the most time on debating online?
Well, I spend a lot of time posting about genetically engineered foods, and a lot of my most popular articles have been on that subject. It's not the only one I like to post about or write about, but I've gotten kind of a reputation for writing blogs of that type. And I think part of the reason is because, well, at least according to Pew reports a few years ago, the gap between scientists and public perception was even greater on that topic than, for instance, another topic I cover pretty often, which is anthropogenic global warming,
Right.
climate science stuff. I've done, about 10 or 12 or so blogs on that topic. So, the fact that there's like this huge disagreement between the public and science on that intrigues me, because it's like a conspiracy theory that went mainstream. Like when you think of conspiracy theories like 9/11, truthers and stuff like that, it's a pretty small subset of the population. I mean, not trivial, but a lot smaller than, for instance, with genetically engineered foods, where there's like a huge chunk of the public.
people.
It's not just like the batshit crazy Alex Jones types, that have bought into a lot of this misinformation, and that kind of interests me. And also, I think it's a cool topic. I mean, I was never anti-GMO because even before I even took any biology classes in college, even as a kid, before I even knew what genetics, was really, I thought that genetic engineering was cool because that was how you got superpowers, right?
Right.
That's how the Hulk got his superpowers.
That's right.
But however, I did kind of buy into some of the myths, the Monsanto myths and stuff like that. And I wasn't, super into it, and, going around with signs and whatnot, but I didn't see any reason why I should doubt the people in my life who I trusted, who would tell me things like that. And so I said, well, okay, regardless of whether or not what this company is doing with this capability, we shouldn't brush aside the fact that the possibilities with this are pretty endless and, can do a lot of good. And so later I found out that even the criticisms specific to the implementations that have already been undertaken, that those were pretty specious as well, and that even some of the anti-Monsanto stuff was just plain not true. Their company, I mean, can't be surprised, if they pull some BS, from time to time, but most of the specific myths that people would recite were distortions or outright untrue. And I just really got pulled into that scene. I started joining these Facebook groups, So that's really, you asked me earlier about how I started with public outreach of this type. And part of that, the bridging the gap there, was just arguing online. Just arguing about whatever, like religion, philosophy, scientific topics, and a lot of it I was self-taught in, it wasn't until later where I started taking those topics in a formal setting, and it just kind of snowballed.
We're being distracted by Dave on the screen. Sorry.
No, that's me. I'm doing that.
What's Cory?
Cory.
Cory's the worst.
I'm moving.
See, I can't wait for goats that can spin spider silk. That's what I'm excited for.
Are they going to spin? Oh, I guess technically they're going to spin a large quantity of it then,
Yeah,
hey?
yeah.
I have
That's actually a thing.
I have a question.
Yeah.
It's annoying, and you can just tell me to fuck off if you want. But with all the schooling
He
that
can't.
you're
He's
doing,
Canadian now.
oh, we tell each other to fuck off all the time.
Don't.
Okay, anyway.
That's not supposed to be common knowledge, though.
What are you doing?
You're going to say.
My question is, with all this book learning that you're doing, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Well, that is the question, isn't it?
It's a question. Or maybe you're just doing it because you're out of
it's
interest.
A persistent one.
I know, although knowing humans ask you that, which is why I asked. But I was wondering if you had any.
What else is there to do? But just to get good at stuff, that you think is cool.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people went to school like that. They just went to school. They thought. I mean, that's why I went to school. That's why I did all my degrees. I just went to school. I thought it was interesting, and eventually I was like, "Oh fuck, I have a baby. I better get a real job." Then I did 3 more years of school, and then I got a job.
For
a long time there's just never that sense of urgency, where it's like, okay, you have to fit, some sort of predetermined mold now, and no more just doing shit because it seems like it'd be cool to get better at, just there's been no reason to. I don't have any kids. I'm a homeowner. What else am I going to do except, try to be as good as I can get at stuff I enjoy doing.
That's awesome.
What's interesting, for me, so I went to school for post-secondary for 14 years, okay? And a lot of that was just me being like, oh, I'm interested in this, so I'm going to take this. And then, that's why I did a degree in physics. And then I was like, oh, I'm going to do a PhD in physics. And I don't know, I'm going to do something really impractical like astronomy. I wasn't at all thinking career. I was just thinking this is interesting, right? And then at the end, like I said, baby, I was like, well, I better get a real job. So I did 3 more years of training, and now I work in healthcare. And it's really strange to me to be working with people who are my age, who, they've been working since they're 20. Yeah. And they took a couple year degree or a program, and then they've been doing this same job since they were 20, and they bought their house when they were 23 or whatever, and they got married when they were 24, and they just went and they had their kids, and I'm just like, wow, I felt like I missed all that. I was just doing school. And now I'm still renting. And, and I don't know. I feel like I missed the dream. Yeah.
It's funny how we, is that the dream? For me, I meant
the dream in quotes.
To post-secondary education at all. I went to vocational school and realized that I didn't want to be a makeup artist. And then
you went to school to be a makeup artist.
I did. Wow. Actually, I went to Ireland, was a nanny, and then I came back and did makeup art. And then I didn't meet my husband until I was 27. We didn't buy a house till 2011. So it totally went a different way. And now I'm like, oh, I wish I could go to school. I'm sitting here being super jealous of all of the education that is had.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm like the epitome of white privilege. When people talk about that, or have privilege in every imaginable domain, pretty much,
But you seem to be using it for good. You don't seem to be using it for evil.
Our real estate prices are ridiculous here, though. How much is a house in New Mexico? $50?
Something like that.
Well, labor's cheap, right?
No, well, you could probably pick one up for, it depends on how many bedrooms you want. Mine was pretty cheap. It was $165K for a 4-bedroom.
That's fantastic.
Huge. If that was Canadian, though, that would be $300,000.
Depending on the area, or 3 to 4.
Well, we are in the middle of the freaking desert.
We're in the middle of the freaking prairie. What's here? Nothing.
Do you have gross bugs there?
Just put some pavement over the dust, and call it
call it good.
What kind of gross bugs do you have there?
Camel spiders.
I don't really spend a whole lot of time around them. I've heard that we have tarantula hawks. It's the state insect.
Are you kidding me?
I don't know what that means. That doesn't sound good.
That sounds.
I've never seen one in my entire life.
Scary.
Do you have scorpions in your bathtub or whatever?
Apparently.
You do, don't you?
No, no. The only bug problems I have in my house are cockroaches, and if I get really serious with the extermination methods, and I can deal with those. So I even actually let some smaller spiders, live in my house because they serve a useful purpose.
Apparently. We talked about that on our
Sometimes
last
even-
episode.
Yeah, you're not supposed to kill the spiders that are in your house.
Even though
Yeah,
you
even
eat
the
them all.
black widow that hangs out in between my back door and the screen door, I leave that thing alone.
You do.
Yeah, that one especially you don't
It's
touch.
not bothering me, and I'm not bothering it. So you're good.
I
So
would
you
kill
stay
it.
in your corner. Your name
Yeah.
is Steve, and just do your thing over there.
No.
Sounds like
Straight
a
up
good
no.
plan.
Straight up no.
I saw a big gross one in my office the other day, and I told my husband about it, and I was like, I don't think I can let that one live, and he dispatched it very quickly.
I would probably approach it a lot differently if I had small children around.
Yeah, you don't want any
Yeah.
poisonous spiders around with small kids.
Venomous.
Yeah. Whatever.
They're
Pedantic.
different. They're totally different.
Did he have to come back on the show?
did you
he
guys know
have
what I
to?
meant?
Yes.
Yeah.
I posted a cartoon the other day about technically correct man.
That's the best
This
correct to
person
be.
is-
This
he's
man is the
laying on the
embodiment.
ground. He's like, "Oh, I got bitten by a poisonous snake," and he's like, actually, it's venomous." And
He flies off.
Thanks, technically correct man.
Yeah, then he flies off and the guy
He
dies.
walks away, and then it shows the guy as a skeleton later on, just
Yeah.
laid there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I also like electrocuted, right? Oh, I got electrocuted. You mean you had an electric shock? Yes.
yes.
What are your
Don't call an
thoughts?
ambulance.
What are your thoughts on Susanna Martinez?
like-
Who?
I don't really have many thoughts on
Who's that?
Susanna Martinez.
It's the governor of New Mexico.
Oh, there you
She's
go.
a Republican. She's a horrible human being.
Is she?
We just tolerate her.
Right. It's like having the Sask party in charge of your
Right.
province, right?
Mm-hmm.
You live underneath them
No,
and
no.
complain.
Gary Johnson used to be our governor.
Oh, geez.
Not that long ago. Yeah. He
Good old
did
Gary.
away with municipal water fluoridation,
Right.
which I thought was pretty dumb, but who cares what I think, right?
I guess, eh? Fluoridation is only, a useful service.
It's only proven. We don't have it here because, I don't know why.
We don't know why we don't have it here.
Why don't we have daylight savings? Nobody knows that either.
Well, because daylight savings is
Cows
dumb.
or whatever.
I don't like daylight savings.
Here's what I want. I want daylight savings all the time. Like I want to always spring forward, so it's always later. That's what I want. Yes. No, I'm right.
Call it
Stop it.
daylight wastings.
That's what I want. That's what I
Why does
want.
that come
Wasting
back?
time.
Why?
Daylight wasting time is a good name. I like that.
That's what I've been calling it for years.
Yeah.
Daylight wasting
Yeah,
time.
that's and how many? Not all of this. Not the entire states recognize daylight savings time either.
Most of the states don't recognize that
Arizona's
the Earth is round. Come on.
Arizona is like just one state over from me, and they don't.
They don't, okay.
practice daylight.
I was wondering.
Daylight wasting.
I couldn't remember.
That's why all the Saskatchewanians go down to Arizona for the winter. Because they're like, I don't want no daylight savings time. I'm going down there.
Going south for the winter.
That's where they
That's
go
right.
south. That's where they go.
Yeah,
Snowbirds. Yep.
Southwest for the winter.
so many people do that. Florida.
People
Some
with
people go to
money.
Florida.
We need to build a wall.
Maybe.
Yeah, keep the planes out.
Phoenix is the capital of Saskatchewan.
We're just gonna
Right.
plant a hedge. That's all we're gonna do. It's just a giant hedge.
A shrubbery.
I was thinking when you were talking about the GMO stuff, I think it's got to be about 20 years ago now, I worked custom spraying. And Roundup Ready crops were kind of relatively new and kind of in the markets at that time. And even then, spraying crops was just a thing you did. It just didn't seem like, I didn't understand why anybody was up in arms about it then, and I certainly don't understand it now.
It's the same with the being up in arms about Monsanto not letting you pull seed out of the plants, and you have to buy their product if you want to use it.
Yeah.
It's their product. If you want to use it, you have to buy it.
They did the R&D.
It wasn't really on my radar way back then, but from what I can tell, it's one of the examples in which scientists sort of just kept doing their thing in hopes that all these public fears would dissipate as more and more research piled up and converged on what they expected was most likely going to turn out to be the case. And they probably should have started addressing those myths a lot sooner. Now, I recently wrote a short article about the Streisand effect. And the Streisand effect is, it's based on something that happened where Barbra Streisand's house got photographed, and very few people were seeing it on the internet, but she found out about it and made this huge fuss about it. And since she's so famous, it meant that all of a sudden millions of people were seeing the photos that she was trying to get taken down. Whereas if she had just kept quiet, it would have been a relatively small problem. So I don't know if the fear of that kind of phenomenon played into the fact that there wasn't as much pushback against anti-GMO activism back then. But I do know that it's an example of the opposite occurring, where the fact that you don't address the myths allows it to snowball and gain all this momentum. And soon they have this empire of these interlocking networks of front groups that are loaded with all these bunk arguments that they've spread so far and wide that you can't, no matter how many times you debunk them, they still keep on coming up because we waited too long. It wasn't until, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago where we started getting this huge pushback against the GMO opponents from scientists and science advocates. And, it's been just an uphill battle, so.
Yeah. It seems like
no Streisand effect there.
Right. It seems like that's almost been a thing that's come into play in a bunch of skeptical topics or science-based topics. This is like science was just doing its thing, and slowly but surely people were building up this like anti-vax community. And
can I give you my opinion?
Just give it. Don't even ask permission.
You're asking.
How many guys say, "Can I give you my?"
Can I give you my opinion, guys?
You're interrupting her. Let her talk, please.
Nobody's interrupting. Okay. Here's what I think. So, this is my perspective. So, when I did my degree, my PhD in astronomy, I worked with the Hubble Space Telescope a lot. And the Hubble was unique because when you applied for time on Hubble, you got a grant if you got awarded the time. And part of that grant went towards public outreach. When they started Hubble up, they purposefully earmarked a certain percentage of a grant to public outreach. And as a result, the Hubble had one of the best public outreach teams, probably the best in astronomy. They worked very hard. They had people dedicated to creating press releases and publicly available images, and it's got to be the best known telescope. It's not even the best telescope, okay? But it is maybe for some things, but they did so well with PR because they specifically earmarked money off for public relations. Now, when scientists get money to do stuff, a lot of the time that funding is through governments. That's the vast majority of the time. Certainly in Canada, that's true. I mean, that's true. Generally, governments are the ones with the deep pockets to pay for this stuff. I think that a certain percentage of a grant should be mandated to go towards public outreach. I think scientists should have to, because I don't think scientists are absolved of that. Scientists can't just stick their, heads in the sand and say, "I'm just doing my research. I don't know why all these anti-vaxxers came up." Like, fuck you. The more scientists dissociate themselves from the public, the worse it is, right? Because the scientists are part of the community. They need to have a voice in the community. Part of your responsibility as a scientist is to disseminate what you are figuring out to everyone, not just to write peer-reviewed articles that only 5 people in the world can understand. I don't care how highly cited they are. If nobody understands what you've done except for a very small subsection of people, what's the point? Like we got to change the focus in science. And I think one way to do that is to require a certain amount of funding if you get a grant to go to public outreach. That's my opinion.
Nobody was against telescopes.
No,
Well, the
actually,
Catholic Church was, but
actually, some telescopes have terrible
That was
PR. Like,
wild.
for
Yes.
example, there's telescopes built on like sacred ground in Hawaii,
Yep.
etc.
Ah, yes.
So there actually is some controversy. But I'm just saying, have you ever heard of ALMA?
no.
Huge, very, very important, very prominent recent telescope, and nobody's ever heard of it, right?
Right.
Like, so as an example, or Gemini telescope, or CFHT, or whatever, any SALT, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's all these very important, very prominent telescopes nobody's ever heard of because they haven't
Owl
had
T.
nearly as good a job as
It
Hubble.
never happened.
Sorry?
Owl T, the overwhelmingly large telescope. was never
Well, they
got
built
completed.
something. They built the large binocular telescope, I believe. But I think Owl kind of became a different thing. Anyways, continue.
My view of it is there were lots of people speaking about the benefits and how GMOs were harmless. Tons of scientists were speaking up about it. The problem is
they need money. They should be
The
mandated
problem
to do that. That's just some people who choose to do it because they feel like it's important. It's not part of the culture in science to reach out to do.
nobody's going to listen to Dr.
awareness.
David Matheson when Dr. fucking Oz is on TV.
But if
You
David
need-
Matheson
We don't have
has
enough
funding
celebrity
to
scientists.
You need
do
people.
a good marketing job and hire PR people, then
It's not
he's
enough.
going to do better.
We meet.
I guarantee Monsanto spent hundreds of or tens of millions of dollars on PR. I guarantee it.
well, science is.
There was
Go ahead.
there was a time not too long ago where, and I guess in some circles it probably still is this way, that doing public science outreach was kind of looked down upon. I mean, Carl Sagan got a lot of flack for doing that. It was like they didn't really consider what he was doing to be as legitimate or important. And so I think you're raising an important point in terms of, whether it should be a civic duty or whether it should be part of the person's actual paid job is, something that can be debated. But the point being that it's really important, regardless of whether or not it's advancing things on the research end of it, because people like to say, science doesn't give a shit about your beliefs. Well, people make their decisions based on what they think is true. Well, presumably, or in some cases, it seems like they must know that what they believe is bullshit, and they're just basing their actions on that anyway. Especially politicians, but
Or they'll scroll
I digress.
they'll scroll to the fifth page of Google and find one thing that agrees with them.
The fifth page.
Right.
I think people make their decisions based on what they feel. I think it's a feeling based thing. I think people are a lot more intuitive. I think we're sort of that neuroatypical group of people who don't do that. But
Have feelings?
I think.
to completely allow our feeling. I mean, of course, we'll have biases, but completely allow our feelings to skew our perspective and our beliefs.
Yeah.
Like, how do you believe in a religion otherwise? There's no logical reason to believe anything that any religion says, except that it makes you feel good. It's how you were raised. It feels familiar. It's where your social group is. It seems right. And I think people do it based on feeling.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, sometimes that extends to policy decision making.
Yeah.
Oh,
Big time.
it always does. I often does.
Really socially relevant on a large scale. The people understand a little bit more than they currently do, or accept the validity of the scientific method. Because if you're making decisions based on false premises, then the chances of it turning out good are pretty low. And so that's one of the things I promote. It's like, look, we know that science doesn't have all the answers, otherwise it would stop. And we know that the answers are not infallible. However, we also know that it's a hell of a lot more reliable than anything but science. So that we're going to maximize our likelihood of getting the most things right if we are following this thought process, this irrational empirical approach to knowledge, than if we do some other kind of whimsical thing, just whatever the hell pops into our head that we think how reality ought to be. And we're going to make better decisions in life and in policy if we're taking that into account. What does the best evidence say? It's like, oh, sure, yeah, scientists can be wrong, but what makes you think that they're wrong on this particular issue? You're relying on sheer luck of your guesswork that, this particular aspect of reality will later turn out to be different than how scientists thought it was going to be, and it was just a total gamble. You're playing against the odds. You're just hoping you win the lottery instead of just going with the most likely to succeed protocol.
Well, and media trains us to look and remember and react to the negative over the positive. Like if the old saying, if it bleeds, it leads, is just one of the most well-known things in media. So they latch on to any buzzword or anything that has a negative connotation because that'll draw more subscriptions. And
even when the news is positive, it gets spun in a way that is going to maximize engagement just because they have to in order to survive as media outlets.
Sure. Well, there's no such thing as journalism anymore, right? It doesn't exist.
That's kind of
don't exist.
Yeah.
Take that. This whole conversation makes me think of a quote by Maya Angelou, which I can't remember totally exactly right, but it's something to the effect of, people will not remember what you say. People will not even remember what you do. They will only remember how you make them feel. Yeah. And I feel like that's how politicians operate, right? They play on people's heartstrings, and they do it with people think will feel like the right thing.
They're spin doctors.
Some parents, they just get on, it feels wrong to put vaccines into my child. It's poison. That's what they're going on. And then they read stuff and it just,
when they get a needle.
And it just confirmation bias, right? Like that's, yeah.
Yeah.
I just think I think a lot of it's just about emotional reaction because we're emotional creatures, except for us who are robots and make only logical decisions.
I'm the only non-robot at this table.
No, Angela, will let you be a robot with us.
Well, a lot
is
of
being
those
right
beliefs,
a bias? Because then I'm biased.
A lot of those beliefs get reframed and presented as though they were based on a rational process.
Right.
And I think that's
absolutely
a lot of the sort of debunking that goes on is taking on those kinds of arguments where the person wasn't stupid. They were actually quite clever, and they're coming up with clever ways to post hoc rationalize what they want either that they want to believe or they want other people to believe, or they're just simply predisposed to believe for whatever reason. And so like then you have like the general public of people who are not involved in like anti-vax activism per se, but they are exposed to it, and so those people who are doing the anti-science outreach of some kind or another, they are utilizing these psychological traits of people more effectively, I think, than most of the skeptical community. I know that there's some people out there trying to do it, and you go to these conferences and you will get talks from psychologists who are explaining what we know about this and how it should affect the way we approach interaction with different people. But there's certain sort of people who are more predisposed to logical arguments than others. And so you have to, if you do this kind of outreach that I do, you have to kind of decide what subset of the potential target audience are your actual target audience. So I always say that I'm not interested in what I call cult deprogramming. I'm not interested in trying to deal with people who are ideologically fixed on something that and they do not want their mind to be changed. I'm shooting for people kind of more towards the middle of the spectrum. Maybe they got some misinformation, but they're more or less logical people on most topics. But maybe they haven't investigated deep enough, or maybe they're leaning a little bit that direction. But they're not so far gone that they're unwilling to listen to contrary point of views. And I'm also aiming for people who are already pro-science, but they just want to expand their repertoire. Because none of us know everything. I mean, it's impossible.
Except
no matter
Destin.
no matter how many degrees you get, there's always something you don't know. So by sharing information, you're also arming people who are pro-science. With links and with knowledge, so that they can kind of proliferate it in their own way as they deem fit. And so there's those people, and and what I call the fence sitters. people are totally undecided. It's not really a topic they feel they've arrived at a solid conclusion on, and they might not argue with you in the comments, but they might read the comments. That's one of the things I value about this sort of social media outlet is that so many people are seeing it. I don't have to change the mind of someone who is dogmatic. All I have to do is show other people the discrepancy in the reasonableness of the conclusions we're putting forth.
Do you think there's any hope for those people that are staunchly against having their mind changed? Do you think like the people that are like hardcore anti-vax, hardcore anti-GMO, pro-organic all the time, do you think that there's any...
Well, that scene from Dumb and Dumber where Lloyd says, so what are my chances? Like 1 in 100? And she's like, well, I was thinking more of 1 in a million. It's like, so you're telling me there's a chance.
Yeah.
It's non-zero. I think it's non-zero. I just think it's a really small, a very small portion of those people may end up changing their mind. And I know this because I've met some of them. You know,
I think you'd have to get a critical mass, because these people are obviously very influenced by their peer group, right? And by this group think of, so if you could get it to be like culturally unacceptable enough to have these viewpoints, like racism, right? Like if you can get enough people to be against, or to like shit on them for having this belief, and if you don't get reinforcement on, this is the thing that the internet's so insidious about, is people can find other people of like-minded beliefs and just kind of feed each other, right? But if you can get that mass critically low enough, I think you could flip a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that social engineering angle is something a lot of people have been trying. It's make these idiotic things undesirable to believe.
Right.
Make it so that it's embarrassing to admit that you think vaccines cause autism, or embarrassing to believe that genetically engineered foods are going to give you cancer and stuff like that.
Is that effective though? Like fat shaming doesn't necessarily work. Fit shaming doesn't necessarily work, and that's not a thing. But
I wish dumb shaming did.
Anthony Magnabosco has done some really interesting things with street epistemology, and I think the things that he does, he just by asking really thought-provoking questions.
Well, that's a good question, because even with the racism example, it seemed like people were always getting shouted down, in public places or social media and stuff like that. And then, so it gave this illusion that maybe the problem wasn't as bad as it was not that long ago. And then here in the U.S., it turned out that it never went away. It was just festering beneath the surface as people were discouraged from publicly voicing those kinds of views, and it turned out it was always there, It maybe it decreased a little bit, but it was just, I think a lot of us were kind of naive in thinking that things had improved more than they really had.
Can I say something?
Please do.
Did you ever hear that Superman helped get rid of the Ku Klux Klan?
Yes.
So this is super
I
interesting.
didn't, but that is freaking awesome.
Find this article. I can't even remember where Credible Hulk, you should post this and everyone will know about it, but it's super interesting.
Yes.
This dude kind of infiltrated the Ku Klux Klan as it kind of reached its zenith. What I think, don't quote me if I could be wrong, 1930s, 1940s. They were gaining more and more momentum, had a lot of membership. So this guy, he was against their religion, and anyway, he joined the Klan to kind of as an infiltrator. And so, he discovered their secret handshake and their kind of the goofy shit that they were doing. And what he did is he fed this to I think a friend or a colleague of his who worked on the Superman comics. And so Superman would fight Klan members in the comics, right? And they would also incorporate real actual details about the Klan, like the secret handshakes and the whoever the Grand Poobah is and whatever, all the way, and they made
Grand
it.
Dragon.
Sorry? Grand Dragon, whatever. I'm sorry, I'm thinking Flintstones, not Clan. Anyways, but the idea is that so they would mock the Clan in the comic books, and then these guys would go home after their Clan meeting, their kids reading the comic books where Superman's beating the Clan, and how do they know all our secret stuff, and makes it seem really stupid, and Clan membership dropped way down. Obviously, still a racism problem. I'm hearing you, but hey, there's an example of where you can get a social push out away from the Clan just because it just became so socially unacceptable through Superman in particular. Super cool.
Maybe.
What? Read the article.
Well,
I don't remember or where it's from or who wrote
I remember reading that too, but there's no empirical evidence that he actually caused a decrease in membership.
Bite me. See? My anecdotal evidence is amazing.
Yeah, that's right.
You have amazing anecdotal evidence.
Thank you.
I love your anecdotal evidence.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we're coming up on just about an hour. So I guess if anybody's listening who doesn't already know where to find your stuff, where can they find your stuff?
Well, my Facebook page is the Real Credible Hulk. It's facebook.com/The Real Credible Hulk. My website where I do my blogging is crediblehulk.org, and also have Twitter and Instagram pages that I'm not quite as active on, but I post every few days or so, and those are _credible_Hulk_ for both sites.
And your MySpace?
Oh, yeah, I'm on Google Plus as well, but I never post on there.
You can't just search for any Credible Hulk, though. It's got to be the Real Credible Hulk. There's a lot of credible Hulks.
Credible.
Yeah, there are a few pages.
Right?
Pretty sure mine has the most subscribers.
Yeah, that's right.
Live
measure
journal?
of anything. But that's one way you can tell whether it's me. At least on Facebook. My Twitter and Instagram are much more recent, and they're not as large.
Very cool. I'll provide a bunch of links in the show notes. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for having
fun.
me. It was a lot of fun. Aside from the audio problems in the beginning.
Yeah.
Fuck Skype.
Yeah, fuck Skype.
It's all
That's how we
Skype's
roll.
fault.
Right on. And I guess we will go to a ad break.
Are you done getting your brain stormed?
We here at Packard Pokesat, we poke at beliefs, religion, news, and oddities from across the web.
Join us, along with occasional guest hosts from people in the secular atheist movement,
Where we poke at all of this and more Friday nights.
at vaughnlive.tv/Packard Pokesat.
Okay, Connie, are we done with this promo?
Well, how are they supposed to find us, Packard?
Oh, shit. I forgot about that. I know. They can find us using a compass.
No, that won't work.
Well, they can find us at Packard Pokesat at WordPress.com. Where can they find us? Well, they
All
can
the way back to Newark.
all the way back in Newark. Well, they can find us. They can find us at Packard Pokesat on packardpokesat.wordpress.com, Twitter, Facebook, iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, and YouTube.
Just don't try the magic 8-ball.
Yeah, I know. I tried that last week, but all I got was try again later.
We have a book excerpt from Lisa, and then we will do our closing stuff.
Okay, so this needs a little bit of explanation, I think, first. The book I chose was The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. Actually got a lot of press, I think, because Oprah sort of picked it up and said how much she liked it, so I'm sorry about that, but I read it before Oprah liked it. So, yeah, I think if you go buy it in the bookstore now, it actually has Oprah's face on it. I think she played her in the movie version or something. So anyways, whatever. Sorry, guys.
She played
Henrietta Lacks, I think.
not her herself, but like the child of her.
Oh, Deborah.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Don't ask me why I know that.
So let me just read the back of the book a little bit to explain. Her name was Henrietta Lacks, but scientists know her as Gila. She was a poor black tobacco farmer whose cells, taken without her knowledge in 1951, became one of the most important tools in medicine, vital for developing the polio vaccine, cloning, gene mapping, and more. Henrietta's cells have been bought and sold by the billions, yet she remains virtually unknown, and her family can't afford health insurance. So Henrietta Lacks was, as it says, a poor black woman in the United States who got cervical cancer. And it was some sort of really weird, virulent version. They harvested some of her cells, and these cells, known as HeLa cells, will grow in a lab. I mean, these cells were taken without her permission. Nobody knew, she didn't know, her family didn't know this was happening. And I mean, just think about how they named them HeLa after Henrietta Lacks. You would never name a cell line culture from the patient you got them from now. Like, it just, in terms of the patient privacy,
totally,
it's just insane. Anyways, that would never happen now. But in fact, they've tried to do this with other people. They've tried to harvest cells and grow them, and nothing grows like HeLa cells. HeLa cells are like unkillable. They are, there has never been a cell line that has ever lasted this long from humans before.
Wow.
They're very virulent cells that are very powerful and really have been very useful in developing science, except that her family was never really told about it and didn't know anything about it. So probably about 10, 15 years ago now, Rebecca Skloot, who is a white lady, actually started looking into it. And the book is all about how, like, it's about the research that she did and what she discovered about Henrietta Lacks, and also her interaction with their family and, slowly gaining their trust in order to have access. And anyway, so it's a very compassionate book, and it's very beautiful. So there's that part of the story. But so I was watching all the BS going on down in the States this week with children being taken from their parents. And I was trying to think of a book that would maybe pay homage to that a little bit. And I remembered reading this book probably a couple years ago now, so I don't remember all the details of it, but it was a very beautiful book. And so Henrietta Lacks was very devoted to her children. She had a daughter, Deborah, who grew into adulthood. And she also had, and I think she had other children as well, but it also had another daughter named Elsie, who was not well mentally. And she carefully took care of that little girl. And there's a part of this book that discusses how Henrietta's last words were, to take care of the children. Okay, that she wanted people to take care of her children. Somehow, her daughter Elsie got put into an institution. And I don't remember how that happened, actually. It's been a while since I read this book, but I thought this would be a really good quote to read, just because we're talking about children being taken away from their parents. In this case, her mother was dead, but in an event where a parent can't be there to advocate for a child, this is the kind of thing that can happen. So that's what I'm going to read. So basically, in this part of the story, the author, Rebecca, and Henrietta's daughter, Deborah, went to the institution, which still exists, but is no longer called the, quote, what was it called? Sorry, I'm going to get it right. The Hospital for the Negro Insane at the Crownsville Hospital Center. Okay, so they went to the old Hospital for the Negro Insane. So, and they were talking to a guy named Paul Lurtz, who was basically the director of performance and improvement, and he also happened to be a social worker. And he was kind of the only person who could help them find any medical records. So, what did you say her full name was? Lurtz asked, running his finger down a list of names written in careful script next to page numbers. Elsie Lacks, I said, scanning the names over his shoulder as my heart raced. Then in a daze, I pointed to the words Elsie Lacks on the page and said, "Oh my God, there she is." Deborah gasped, and her face suddenly ashen. She closed her eyes, grabbed my arm to steady herself, and started whispering, "Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord." "Wow, this really surprises me," Lurtz said. "It was very unlikely she'd be in here." Deborah and I began hopping around and clapping. No matter what the record said, at least it would tell us something about Elsie's life, which we figured was better than knowing nothing at all. Lurtz opened to Elsie's page, then quickly closed his eyes and pressed the book to his chest before we could see anything. "I've never seen a picture in one of these reports," he whispered. He lowered the book so we could all see, and suddenly time seemed to stop. The three of us stood, our heads nearly touching over the page, as Deborah cried, "Oh, my baby, she looks just like my daughter. She looks just like Davin. She looks just like my father. She got that smooth olive black skin." Lurtz and I just stared, speechless. In the photo, Elsie stands in front of a wall painted with numbers for measuring height. Her hair, which Henrietta once spent hours combing and braiding, is frizzy with thick mats that stop just below the 5-foot mark behind her. Her once beautiful eyes bulge from her head, slightly bruised and almost swollen shut. She stares somewhere just below the camera, crying, her face misshapen and barely recognizable, her nostrils inflamed and ringed with mucus, her lips, swollen to nearly twice their normal size, are surrounded by a deep, dark ring of chapped skin. Her tongue is thick and protrudes from her mouth. She appears to be screaming. Her head is twisted unnaturally to the left, chin raised and held in place by a large pair of white hands. She doesn't want her head held like that, Deborah whispered. Why are they holding her head like that? No one spoke. We all just stood there, staring at those big white hands wrapped around Elsie's neck. They were well manicured and feminine, pinky, slightly raised, hands you'd see in a commercial for nail polish, not wrapped around the throat of a crying child. Deborah laid her old picture of Elsie as a young girl next to the new photo. Oh, she was beautiful, Lurtz whispered. Deborah ran her fingers across Elsie's face in the Crownsville photo. She looks like she wondering where I'm at, she said. She looks like she needs her sister. The photo was attached to the top corner of Elsie's autopsy report, which Lurtz and I began reading, saying occasional phrases out loud. Diagnosis of idiocy, directly connected with syphilis. Self-induced vomit by thrusting fingers down her throat for 6 months prior to death. In the end, it said she was vomiting coffee ground material, which was probably clotted blood. Just as Lurtz read the phrase, vomited coffee ground material, out loud, a short, round, balding man in a dark business suit stormed into the room, telling me to stop taking notes and demanding to know what was going on here. This is the family of a patient, Lurtz snapped. They're here to look at a patient's medical records. The man paused, looking at Deborah, then at me, a short black woman in her 50s, and a taller white woman in her 20s. Deborah gripped her cane and stared at him in the eye with a look that just begged him to mess with her. She reached into her bag and pulled out 3 pieces of paper, her birth certificate, Elsie's birth certificate, and the legal document giving her power of attorney over Elsie, something she'd spent months getting, just in case anyone tried to stop her from doing precisely what we were doing. She handed them to the man, who grabbed the autopsy report book and started reading. Deborah and I glared at him, both so furious at him for trying to stop that neither of us realized he was one of the only hospital officials who'd ever tried to protect the Lax's family privacy. Can Deborah get a copy of that autopsy report? I asked Lurtz. Yes, she can, he said, if she submits a written request. He grabbed a piece of paper from the desk and handed it to Deborah. What am I supposed to write? She asked. Lurtz began reciting. I, Deborah Lax. Within moments, she had an official medical record request on a torn piece of paper. She handed it to Lurtz and told him I need a good blowed-up copy of that picture, too. Before Lurtz left to make photocopies with the bald man close behind, he handed me a stack of photos and documents to look at while he was gone. The first document in the stack was a Washington Post article from 1958, 3 years after Elsie's death, with the headline, Overcrowded Hospital, quote, loses curable patients. Lack of staff at Crownsville pushes them to chronic stage. The second I read the title, I flipped the article face down in my lap. For a moment, I considered not showing it to Deborah. I thought maybe I should read it first so I could prepare her for whatever awful thing they were about to learn. But she grabbed it from my hand and read the headline out loud, then looked up, her eyes dazed. This is nice, she said, pointing to a large illustration that showed a group of men in various states of despair, holding their heads, lying on the floor, or huddled in corners. I'd like to have this for my wall. She handed it back to me and asked me to read it out loud. Are you sure? I asked. This is probably going to say some pretty upsetting things. Do you want me to read it first and tell you what it says? No, she snapped. Like he told us, they didn't have the money to take care of black people. She walked behind me to follow along over my shoulder as I read. Then she scanned the page and pointed to several words on the page. Gruesome, she said. Fearsome black words. So I'm just going to jump in here. This is the part I really wanted to read to you guys. Sorry, this is going a bit long, but this is the part I think is really, really interesting and terrible. The Crownsville that Elsie died in was far worse than anything Deborah had imagined. Patients arrived from nearby institutions packed in a train car. In 1955, the year Elsie died, the population of Crownsville was at a record high of more than 2,700 patients, nearly 800 above maximum capacity. In 1948, the only year figures were available, Crownsville averaged 1 doctor for every 225 patients, and its death rate was far higher than its discharge rate. Patients were locked in poorly ventilated cell blocks with drains on the floor instead of toilets. Black men, women, and children suffering with everything from dementia and tuberculosis to nervousness, lack of self-confidence, and epilepsy were packed into every conceivable space, including windowless basement rooms and barred-in porches. When they had beds, they usually slept 2 or more on a twin mattress, lying head to foot, forced to crawl across a sea of sleeping bodies to reach their beds. Inmates weren't separated by age or sex and often included sex offenders. There were riots and homemade weapons. Unruly patients were tied to their beds or secluded in locked rooms. I later learned that while Elsie was at Crownsville, scientists often conducted research on patients there without consent, including one study titled Pneumoencephalographics and Skull X-ray Studies in 100 Epileptics. Pneumoencephalography was a technique developed in 1919 for taking images of the brain, which floats in a sea of fluid. That fluid protects the brain from leakage, but makes it very difficult to X-ray since images are taken through fluid are cloudy. Pneumoencephalography involved drilling holes into the skulls of research subjects, drawing fluid surrounding their brains, and pumping air or helium into the skull in place of the fluid to allow crisp X-rays of their brains through the skull. The side effects, crippling headaches, dizziness, seizures, vomited, lasted until the body naturally refilled the skull with spinal fluid, which usually took 2 or 3 months. Because pneumoencephalography could cause permanent brain damage and paralysis, it was abandoned in the 1970s. There is no evidence that the scientists who did research on patients at Crownsville got consent from either the patients or their parents. Based on the number of patients listed in the pneumoencephalography study and the years it was conducted, Lurtz later told me it most likely involved every epileptic child in the hospital, including Elsie. The same is likely true of at least one other study called, quote, the use of deep temporal leads in the study of psychomotor epilepsy, which involved inserting metal probes into patients' brains. Soon after Elsie's death, a new warden took over at Crownsville and began releasing hundreds of patients who'd been institutionalized unnecessarily. The Washington Post article quoted him saying, "The worst thing you can do to a sick person is close the door and forget about him." When I read that line out loud, Deborah whispered, "We didn't forget about her. My mother died. Nobody told me she was here. I would have got her out." So, sorry for the sad quote, but I just thought it was, and I'm not saying that that's the conditions that the children in the United States now are being held in, but I just want to point out the dangers of institutionalizing children this way without advocates to consent for them and advocate for them. So that was
the same thing happened in residential schools. They did nutritional experiments on them, and they did vaccination experiments on them as well. It was same exact thing. Very tragic. Yeah,
I don't know. This is sort of
kind of a downer.
Almost leaves you speechless. Like I don't know what to say. Like
I just can't drilling holes in children's brains to experiment on them. I'm just like vulnerable children with mental illness. Like I just.
And did they know what was happening? And did like what was it? Were they
and the side effects being so terrible for months and months and months and brain damage and
that's disgusting.
All right. Okay, so let's go to listener feedback. Hopefully this will boost our spirits a little bit. All right. So on Twitter, from the episode with Mandisa Thomas, at Randy Lamonda said, "I think it's important to have a black atheist organization because it gives people permission to call themselves atheist, just like gay atheist. Quote, oh, I'm black, gay, female, student, and an atheist." At Jesse Hoffner said, "I'm in complete agreement. I could listen to at Mandy0904 talk all day. She's wonderful." And at Keith Timber said, "Angela's rendition of Anthony Bourdain's piece made me cry a bit. Listen to it twice. Tell her thanks." So that's cool. Yeah, that's right.
Thanks, guy.
From the episode Legalizing Drugs and Crushing Capitalism, at Jesse Hoffner said, "Prediction: by December, you will be a full-blown communist. We welcome you." And then from the episode Spiders Giving Rim Jobs, there was a lot of back and forth between at Jesse Hoffner and at Atheist House on Twitter. They were talking about the Christian music, heavy metal stuff that we mentioned.
Yeah.
There was a lot of back and forth on that. So, yeah. On the YouTubes, we're up to a whopping 99 subscribers.
Woo!
Wow. Whoa. Are you going to be number 100?
Yay for almost 100. So that's cool.
Wow.
On the video about nanopads, organic sanitary pads, Lido Arnor said, "What the ever flying fuck?" So, yeah.
Valid point.
On the video for our interview with Mandisa, a Sandy Plummer said, Hi, I am inspired by this information. I'm struggling with my own dwindling faith and living with the fear of going to hell. Which is, I think, something that a lot of religious people can kind of relate to.
Definitely.
It's not something I ever experienced really the way that true believers did.
I think I've struggled with that myself. I think just as you deconvert, you kind of lose your faith, but then you still have that leftover fear of hell.
Right.
There, that because as much as it's liberating, it just feels like the floor is just coming out and you have no choice but to just go to hell, because what's the alternative, right?
Right.
It's a weird feeling, and I think it took me a while, and it kind of is a sneaky thing. It just kind of eventually you can just heave a sigh of relief, because for myself it kind of dissipated.
Gothic Alice and Misanthrope are now our 100th and 101st.
Yes! Guys are best.
It's like a YouTube subscriber podcast-a-thon.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Raise
you
those
people are the best.
Click that subscribe. Click that subscribe.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. On the Is Jordan Peterson an Idiot video, Matt Doring said, at a lose for words, ... Came in with ears open. This is the most butthurt video ever. 0 logical points. I'd love to hear any of you talk to him in person and not get roasted alive and feel ashamed of your ignorance. Just wanted you all to know this was horrible.
Did you see Jim Jeffries totally
he didn't like it.
Did you see the video of Jim Jeffries today?
I did, yeah. 42 seconds of bliss. Jim Jeffries makes Jordan Peterson go, oh, I might be wrong then.
You know, to his credit, he actually said that, though, right?
That's right.
Who
Fair.
actually does that?
Fair.
Yeah.
I'll give him credit for that.
The great and mighty Oz.
Oz has spoken. On one of our older videos, our interview with Amy Tudor, Sarah Dunbar gave us a 2-part comment. The first one was, I enjoyed Dr. Tudor's interview. Great. The second part refers to a discussion we had with David Richards regarding the One System SASC.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a bit fizzy on the details. I can't remember exactly where we went with that conversation, but I appreciate the comment.
5 studios ago.
Yeah, that's right.
That's 5 studios ago.
It's 5 studios ago.
This is 5.1? What? 5.0?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So she said, Catholicism cannot fundamentally change. What changed was the Vatican was infiltrated by heretics, as predicted in countless Catholic prophecies. The Vatican to faith is not Catholicism. It is a new religion created in the 1960s. That Catholicism remained fundamentally unchanged for 2,000 years is easily proven. I understand you want to give Catholics credit, quote unquote Catholics credit for accepting religious liberty, but the fact is that religious liberty is fundamentally anti-Catholic. To accept religious liberty means apostasy. Those self-professed, quote unquote, Catholics who embrace liberalism are apostates, whether they recognize it or not. They may be well-meaning, but they are not Catholic. Not only are all pre-Vatican II papal documents and theologians in agreement on this, the Bible itself is very clearly against religious liberty. Any honest person should recognize it.
That's a huge discussion.
I'd like to unpack that a little bit.
That's a huge discussion.
I'd really like to unpack that a little bit.
I'm not, and I mean, I'm not sure if this person's coming at it from a Catholic perspective.
It sounds like they are. It sounds like
yes and no.
There's like a Catholic who's like butthurt about Vatican II, which happened in the 60s. So when they did a bunch of revamping that's when like mass started being in the language of wherever it was instead of in Latin, and that's when they made a bunch of changes at that time. Sorry. This person seems like they're still upset about it. This is what this sounds like to me.
Yeah, they probably don't accept a lot of modern theology then. Like liberation theology is probably heresy to them. So
interesting.
Very interesting.
I'm not up on my history of Catholic Church stuff.
Was that a YouTube comment?
Yes.
And yet usually YouTube comments are so excellent.
Yes, usually. Yes.
But, I mean, whatever. It's just
I think that's an interesting discussion to have again, because I think there's a lot to unpack in that, like Angela said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, there definitely is.
Sentence by sentence, we should dissect that.
Yes.
Yeah, just okay. Well, not tonight, but another day.
No, not tonight.
Next season.
Next season. That's right. We got some great interaction on Facebook from the Mandisa Thomas episode. I was super happy with it, so I shared it all over the place, and it got like pretty decent downloads, but it got viewed quite a few times.
I really enjoyed that podcast.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And we got a few new folks joining our Facebook group, and thanks to everybody who gives us feedback in the various places.
Yes.
New patrons. No new patrons. Thank you to our
But do we have any nude patrons?
We don't have any nude ones
patrons.
How do you know,
Well,
right?
I
Who
don't
knows who's listening naked? Everyone on the board, let us know.
Yeah, Cory,
If you're a nude patron.
why don't you have one of those like nude Patreon accounts where you share your nudes?
Patrons. No.
People subscribe to your nudes.
Nobody wants that.
I call noodles nudes for short. Does that count?
Like pool noodles? Or like pasta
Spaghetti.
Or
noodles?
like ramen nudes.
Ramen nudes.
Some more macaroni
Nudes for
nudes?
supper, Rachel?
I just had ramen today, so that's right.
There you go. All right. I want to say a special thank you to our top patrons, Bassett, Destin doesn't suck that much, Bob Glenn, Daryl Goosen, Aaron Young, William Driver, and Positively Skeptical. Becoming a top patron just means you donate at the skeptic level on Patreon at patreon.com/brainstormpodcast. Reviews. No new reviews on Facebook, but it looks like I missed an iTunes review from May 24th from TDTF Pod 1, who gave us 5 stars and said, I look forward to hearing more of this in the future.
Yay.
Well, aren't you in for a treat?
Well, this is the future.
This is now the future.
There you go.
We've continued. And we have a new one from June 19th from Skeptical Keith, who gave us 5 stars and said, I like that it's more like listening in on a conversation rather than a presentation. So I guess that's cool. I hope that you might forgive a little bit over the summer, because it's going to be like one-on-one interviews, and it might have more of that presentation type feel than the group chat type thing, but we'll be back in the fall. Hopefully. Yeah, we'll be back in the fall.
Ideally, I'll have my podcast running in the summer.
That would be cool.
By the time you guys are back.
Oh.
But ideally,
Dave's podcast.
this might give me time.
Is it going to be called The Amazing Dave?
No.
That would be great.
What's it going to be called?
I have some ideas, but I'm not sure yet.
Okay.
It's just a social work related podcast. But
The Rise of the Roman Empire?
no.
That would be fantastic.
I thought of
That's Dave's autobiography.
I thought of the Social Servant podcast, but then it's called the SS, and I didn't really like that. Just like social services.
Yeah, that's not good, eh?
I was like, no. I like the name, but too many connotations.
Yeah.
All right. Plug your stuff. Stuff?
I just did.
I have no stuff to plug.
Dave just did. I was recently on an episode of Embrace the Void.
How was that?
It was fun. We talked about equality of opportunity versus equity of outcome. And that will be out next week. And I'm booked to be on Atheist Talk sometime coming up. So I'll share that when it comes out. And I've kind of been talking to various people about doing guest appearances over the summer because I won't be doing this. So I might be able to sacrifice the odd night. So, yeah.
Oh, I'll plug one thing.
Okay. You plug a thing.
If you want to Google this, the National Film Board has a short little film called To Wake Up the Nakota Language. That's kind of neat. And I did the location sound on that.
Oh, cool.
And check it out. It's really short. It's really quick, but it's a neat little portrait of some of the last Nakota speakers in the world. So, dying languages, trying to preserve them. we have quite a few of them here in Canada, actually, that need preservation. So,
yeah, no kidding, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw a cool thing when I was in Victoria at the museum, and they had a little Indigenous exhibit, which was like, it put ours to shame. But they had like a number of different buttons that you could push, and they told you what hello meant in all these different languages.
Oh, that's cool.
And it was really cool. It was all Indigenous languages, and it's crazy to think of how much history there is that we need to preserve.
Well, so much of it, and I think there's really a lack of respect for a lot of that from some of the general population. So
yeah. I'm jacked that there's the teepee is back up.
Yeah, probably not for long.
No, it's lots of trouble in the park there.
The police were just there. Somebody posted, so.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
On Indigenous Appreciation Day, no less, eh?
Actually, there's a wonderful picture on Facebook. I should share it
With
later.
The chief?
No, one of the guys who got dragged out of the teepee.
Oh, geez.
He's like holding a picture of like that image of him getting dragged out by the police.
Right.
And it says Happy National Indigenous Day. And it's him holding a poster talking to a cop.
Right.
It's quite powerful. It's interesting. But,
wow.
Jeez.
Yeah, it's on Facebook. I'll have to share it with you guys when I
do it.
Get a chance.
I guess before we go to start the outro music, I would like to plug Media Indigena. They're taking the summer off as well. They do seasons, but that's a great podcast for listening to Indigenous perspectives. And I mean, I think I've learned a lot since I started listening to it.
Yeah, I think I've heard that one.
It's an awesome show. And of course, we have our friends in Saskatoon, Occulte Veritas.
Yes.
The true crime podcast. So.
Could I plug, speaking of the immigration stuff?
You bet.
There's like a Facebook fundraiser going on. For RACES, the acronym is RAICES.
Oh, yes.
The Refugee and Immigration Center for Education and Legal Services.
Right.
And so far they've almost raised $20 million US to help, with some of the people in the camps.
Is some of that, is some of that coming because of, Melania's poor jacket choices?
Possibly.
I saw quite a bit of backlash about that the last few days or last day or so.
I think it's just nice that there's that much attention, I guess. Like there's that many people donating that give a shit. So,
yeah, that is nice.
Like 20 million is a lot of money, you know, like, if they can keep that going.
For sure.
So I just wanted to plug that if anybody wants to Google that or anything.
Yeah, that's awesome.
There is a fundraiser going on because I think a lot of people are feeling kind of helpless and like they can't really do anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, this might not be the perfect solution to the problem, but
it can help.
It's something.
Yeah, it's something.
It's better than nothing.
That's right.
Definitely.
So having legal help is really important right now for these people. So.
Oh yeah.
All right, Dave, let's cue that outro music.
Alrighty.
For everything else, you can check out the show notes at thebrainstormpodcast.com and our website, brainstormblog.net. Thanks to our financial supporters, Janet, Stephanie, Zach, the Utah Outcasts, Bassett, Will, Aaron, Daryl, Destin Sucks, Bob, Glenn, Destin doesn't suck that much, Magnus, several species of small furry animals gathered together in a cave, Positively Skeptical, Rob, Julie, Chris, and Larry. If you want to join them and help the show grow, then you can do that at patreon.com/brainstormpodcast. Or you can go and buy some stuff at tpublic.com/stores/brainstorm-podcast-gear. You can join us as we start live shows back up again on brainstormradio.net in August. August 31st is our next show. And our guest will be B.J. Mendelsohn, author of The End of Privacy, which is a book about the end, like online privacy and the ways in which our data is used. I want to thank Matthew for joining us. You can find his stuff at facebook.com/TheRealCredibleHulk. So make sure to check that out. Thanks, Dave, for our intro music. Thanks to Aaron Rabbi from the Embrace the Void podcast for doing the intro voiceover. You can find his stuff at voidpod.com. Thanks to Alex Capper-Murdoch for doing the voiceover for our ads, and thanks to Jason Camo for our outro music. You can find his stuff at loststateofmind.com. All music played is either with permission or under the SOCAN license to play. For more information on SOCAN, you can check out the music license info page on our website, brainstormblog.net. Remember to give us a rating, a thumbs up, or a fave on your podcatcher of choice. Join our Facebook group, like our page, follow us on Twitter, share the show, and spread the word. For live listeners, stick around for the after show. You can go to brainstormafterhours.com and listen to the bonus content before it goes patron only. Thanks for listening, and remember, the truth matters.
This is an opinion-based podcast. Each person on the podcast is responsible for their own opinions, and those opinions don't necessarily reflect the views of the rest of the panel. Any guests or anyone associated with the people on the podcast, such as spouses, partners, children, other family members, friends, or employers. No one person speaks for the podcast with the possible exception of Cory, and he doesn't speak for anyone else on the show. The Brainstorm podcast does not represent the views of our sponsors.
We just wanted to say thanks to everyone who listens to us, shares the show, gives us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher, or supports us through Patreon and Gumroad. We don't have a lot of interactions with our listeners, but what we have had proves that we attract some of the best people around. Smart, kind, and cool. An audience truly worthy of the titles hardcore and woo-free. Thanks for helping us make the world a smarter place.